and now talking about a cross-departmental review, don't you think it's actually time to acknowledge that there's no way of tweaking the property tax that will make it fair, because it is by its nature regressive and is going to hit low and middle income families?
Minister.
Of course, I am aware of the status of local property tax and the proposed changes and the debate that's ensuing in relation to it. That is why I recently announced a review of the local property tax, which will look in particular at the impact on LPT liabilities of property price developments. It will include an examination of the outstanding recommendations of the 2015 Thornhill review of the local property tax. It is expected that the review will be completed at the end of August, and the review report will provide a number of policy choices for consideration. It will be informed by the desirability of achieving relative stability, both over the short and longer term, in LPT payments for liable persons. It will include a consultation process to enable all interested parties and individuals to submit their views on the future of LPT. My department will advance work on this matter in conjunction with the Departments of Housing, Planning and Local Government, Public Expenditure and Reform and the Revenue Commissioner. The purpose of the review will be to inform me in relation to any actions I may recommend to Government concerning the overall yield from LPT and its contribution to total tax revenue. It will enable me to revert to Government with proposals for change to LPT in a timely way. Any such changes would need to be legislated for by the first quarter of 2019, so the Revenue Commissioner can be in a place to have the necessary arrangements in respect of the 2020 LPT year. Distribution of LPT revenues to local authorities is the responsibility of the Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government. It's an important source of funding to local authorities, accounting for approximately 1/10 of their revenue income. LPT supplements local authority income from commercial rates, from the provision of goods and services and other government grants. It was introduced to provide an alternative, stable and sustainable funding base for the local government sector, providing greater levels of connection between local government raising and associated expenditure decisions. Retention of the LPT, local retention of LPT, has helped to strengthen financial autonomy at the local authority level, and I expect the current review will look at ways to ensure this continues. And Deputy, I have not deferred any revaluation. What I have done is reminded the House of what the timetable is as currently laid out in the legislation that was passed by this House, which is a revaluation in 2019 to affect bills the year after that.
Deputy Broughan and Deputy Boyd-Barrett. Deputy Broughan.
Thanks, Cian. Well, Minister, I mean, it is a grossly, this Fine Gael tax, has to be said, I mean, it's a grossly unfair tax. I'm just looking at the Stats and Economics Research branch of revenue, and where it lists based on returns 5 or 6 years ago, and it lists the percentages of homes with a valuation of over €300,000. Dublin City comes in at 22%, Dunleary at nearly 60%, Fingal at 21%, South Dublin 19%, Wicklow and Kildare also in the teens. Most other counties, in fact, it's down 0.1%, 0.2%. So, I mean, it is a grossly unfair tax. The very basis of it, because of its attachment to revenue and to social protection payments and so on, it was impossible, I think, for people to challenge it in the way that they challenged the water tax. We have a situation now where many people, I think, would feel that local government should be properly funded, but it should be funded on a fair basis across the whole country. And I think one of the four recommendations of Don Thornhill was that precise point. But at the moment, it's grossly unfair. You're being very unfair to your own city, to your own constituents, and it's time you did something about it.
Thank you, Deputy Boyd-Barrett.
Minister, in our area, people are already being crucified in many cases, but will be absolutely nailed to the wall if anything even approaching the increase in property values is translated into an increase in property tax. And the point about this tax is it doesn't take into account ability to pay. Even with the existing tax, there are 46,000 people who've been forced to defer because their income isn't sufficient to pay the tax. That is going to jump through the roof. But already there's a whole cohort of people who just can't pay. Now, why are you imposing a tax on people who just can't pay? If you're on social welfare but happen to own your house, or if you're a pensioner happen to own your house in an area like Dunleary or South Dublin, your pension or your social welfare or your low pay isn't any greater because you live in an area which has high property values. So what are you going to do to recognise that fundamental injustice?
Minister.
The Deputy opened up by quoting Karl Marx at me, and I think it was also Marx that said that history repeats itself first as tragedy and then as farce. And I think it's a relevant point for the debate we're having here in relation to tax policy. This House, or rather the last Dáil, in many of the inquiries that have been in place, to look at how we ended up in a place of multiple economic crises all at the same time, pointed to the fact that previous governments had narrowed the tax base again and again and again, while increasing expenditure exponentially across that period. Every country who we would look to compare ourselves against has a form of property taxation. And it is vital that our tax base in the coming years does include a local property tax. And I've heard what the Deputy has said there in relation to the fear that people have in relation to the future of the LPT, which I well understand, given that the bills for everybody would have came in over the last number of weeks. And that's why I'll just take the opportunity to say now what I have said before, which is that my intention is that any future changes in LPT, they be moderate, they be fair, and they be predictable. And I am confident with the process that I've outlined, which is well in advance of any change in the revaluation metric, will be able to deal with.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Boyd Barrett and Deputy Broughan.
You first of all, Minister, at the time the property tax was brought in, you said it would. You justified it by saying there would be more money available for local services. Actually, not a cent more. The 25% cut in local government funding that preceded it was never replaced, and then we had a property tax which was reduced central government funding on a euro for euro basis. We got no extra services for this, but what we did get is an unfair tax. And you simply haven't addressed the issue of unaffordability and the regressive nature of the tax. Now, my proposal to you is this. As we proposed in our pre-budget submission, abolish the local property tax for principal private dwellings and replace it with a landlord's tax. In other words, tax second, third, fourth, fifth properties of people who own property which is simply wealth and not the roof over their head. You could replace one with the other. That would be a genuine wealth tax, which would not hit people on low incomes.
Thank you, Deputy Broughan.
Minister, I think people are very nervous about this. Obviously, in approaching 2019, 2020, to see exactly what the review is. Will the review not be published till August? By the way, when will we actually have that? And could you just give us your view on the propositions put forward, I think, by the Parliamentary Budget Office, where it looked at various ways that you could reach a situation of a stable, fair tax, fair local government tax, if you like, across the whole country. But in our county, in Fingal, effectively there's been a 5% increase in the tax, but you have people living in very modest houses, who might be paying 500, 600, 700, 800 euro this next month, early next month, and that extra 5% is, it's a significant thing. Now, the county manager says obviously he's going to do such and such with that money, but at the same time, while local government needs to be funded, as Deputy Boyd Barrett has said, we've had no additional funding from it, and you haven't achieved, I think, the fundamental constitutional basis of a fair tax. This tax isn't one of those.
Conclude, please.
So in relation to the 3 points that have been put to me there, firstly in relation to Deputy Broughan's proposal that we introduce some form of landlord tax, but let's play that out. Let's play out what would happen if we were to increase taxation on landlords to find the additional revenue to offset the identification of the elimination of the local property taxes you're proposing. So in order to do that, Deputy, we'd need to find an additional €500 million of tax revenue from the landlord sector. how many landlords do you think would stay in that business? Well, I'm glad you think it's a good idea, because what you fail to acknowledge is that your definition of wealth is somebody else's roof which they're sleeping under at the moment. And I'm not going to put in place any kind of a tax measure, as you're proposing, that has the risk of incentivising further landlords from leaving the rental sector and exacerbating the kind of difficulties that you regularly and correctly point to. And that risk would be there if we were to follow an action like that. In relation to what the Deputy Broughan has said, I mean, you're right. I am aware of the work that the parliamentary body have done in relation to the future of LPT. I'm also aware of the debate that happened in the Budget Oversight Committee afterwards, where it was very difficult to find consensus in relation to what the new tax model should be. We had some members of the committee say we should move to a square foot basis, or where the tax yield is determined by the size of the property. We had other members of the committee disagree. We had some members say that we should continue to have it based on value, and other members of the committee disagreed with that.
All right, thank you, Minister.
So there is a debate underway in relation to that committee on that very point.
Question number 76 is from Deputy Michael McGrath. Deputy McGrath.